Welcome back to another Powerhouse broadcast experience. Today, we're going to look further into what is involved in accessing the thoughts of God. So without any further ado, let's do it. Accessing the thoughts of God with the mind of Christ involves a renewing of the mind. The Apostle Paul said in his letter to the believers in Rome, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." In his book, Spiritual Intelligence, Chris Vallotton mentioned some key components in further understanding what it means to renew our minds. Vallotton makes reference to one's IQ, which is our intelligent quotient, as well as our EQ, which is our emotional quotient. But he goes further, talking about our SQ, which is our spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence refers to the ability to think like God, utilizing the mind of Christ. Spiritual intelligence involves the ability to think multidimensionally. This means that we not only have a human ability to process things, but believers have access to a divine ability. Listen to how Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1. "My brothers and sisters, when I first came to proclaim to you the secrets of God, I refused to come as an expert, trying to impress you with my eloquent speech and lofty wisdom. For while I was with you, I was determined to be consumed with one topic, Jesus, the crucified Messiah. I stood before you feeling inadequate, filled with reverence for God and trembling under the sense of the importance of my words. The message I preached and how I preached it was not an attempt to sway you with persuasive arguments, but to prove to you the almighty power of God's Holy Spirit. For God intended that your faith not be established on man's wisdom, but by trusting in his almighty power. However, there is a wisdom that we continually speak of when we are among the spiritually mature. Its wisdom did not originate in this present age, nor did it come from the rulers of this age, who are in process of being dethroned. Instead, we continually speak of this wonderful wisdom that comes from God, hidden before now in a mystery. It is his secret plan, destined before the ages, to bring us into glory. None of the rulers of this present world order understand it, for if they had, they never would have crucified the Lord of shining glory. This is why the Old Testament scriptures say, "Things never discovered or heard of before, things beyond our ability to imagine. These are the many things God has in store for all his lovers." And then Paul goes on to say in verse 10, "But God now unveils these profound realities to us by the Spirit." Yes, he has revealed to us his inmost heart and deepest mysteries through the Holy Spirit, who constantly explores all things. After all, who can really see into a person's heart and know his hidden impulses except for the person's spirit? So it is with God. His thoughts and secrets are only fully understood by his Spirit, the Spirit of God. For we did not receive the spirit of this world system, but the Spirit of God, so that we might come to understand and experience all that grace has lavished upon us. And we articulate these realities with the words imparted to us by the Holy Spirit, and not with words taught by human wisdom. We join together Spirit-revealed truth with Spirit-revealed words. Someone living on an entirely human level rejects the revelations of God's Spirit, for they make no sense to him. He can't understand the revelations of the Spirit because they are only discovered by the illumination of the Spirit. Those who live in the Spirit are able to carefully evaluate all things, and they are subject to the scrutiny of no one but God. For who has ever intimately known the mind of the Lord, Yahweh, well enough to become his counselor? Christ has. And now we possess Christ's perceptions, the mind of Christ. Notice again the emphasis on a specific divine wisdom that goes far beyond human ability. In Paul's letter to the believers in Ephesus, he says this, "Be renewed in the spirit of your mind," Ephesians 4:23. Well, what does that mean? Is Paul talking about our mind, or is he talking about our spirit? On the surface, it sounds like Paul is simply encouraging them to learn to think well. But if we take a closer look at this, we'll see that there's more there. Paul is not just saying to renew our IQ or EQ, but rather the spirit of your mind. Paul was very familiar with what it meant to think well. At the age of 13, young Paul, whose name was Saul before it was changed by the Lord, was sent to Palestine to learn from a rabbi named Gamaliel. While under the teachings of Gamaliel, young Saul mastered Jewish history, the Psalms, and the entire works of the prophets. His education would continue for the next 5 to 6 years as he learned such thing as dissecting Scripture. Saul then went on to become a lawyer and was no doubt looking to one day becoming a member of the Sanhedrin, which was like the Jewish Supreme Court at that time. The Sanhedrin was made up of 71 men who ruled over Jewish life and religion. Paul was most likely on his way to a Sanhedrin position. So Paul's exhortation to be renewed in the spirit of our minds was not a slip of the tongue or a figure of speech. Paul was intentionally instructing us to give attention to a specific dimension of thinking. Paul was talking about and contrasting the differences between a natural dimension of wisdom and a divine, godly, heavenly wisdom. And he made it clear that divine wisdom is exclusive to believers. It's even the same for today. Those without Christ can only draw from the wisdom of man and are excluded from accessing the mind of Christ. Take note how Paul answered the prophet Isaiah by quoting Isaiah's question in chapter 2 and then answering it in verse 16. He said this, "For who has ever intimately known the mind of the Lord Yahweh well enough to become his counselor?" His answer, Christ has. And now we possess Christ's perception, the mind of Christ. Paul answered the prophet Isaiah of old by making it clear that those things that they did not know back then is now known because of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. And now we have God's Spirit within us. His Spirit gives us access to his mind and thoughts. So how exactly do we access God's mind and thoughts? It's through his Spirit that now lives in us. It's like this. Picture our minds being like a smartphone. Our smartphones have a certain amount of memory capacity. It could be 64 or 128 gigs or 256. It is possible to increase the capacity of our phones simply by upgrading to a bigger phone. We could move from 64 gigs to 128 or 128 to 256. In the same way, it is possible to increase our mind's capacity with education and experience. But even with education and life experiences, our brain's capacity is still limited. But when our smartphones connect to Wi-Fi, we suddenly have the ability to access the entire internet, which has billions of times more information than what could be held and stored on a single smartphone's memory. In the same way, when our minds connect to the Holy Spirit, we access the mind of Christ. And then we can tap into the infinite one who knows everything. Valentin refers to this as spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence transcends IQ and EQ in the same way that the internet has billions of times more information than the memory on our smartphones. In other words, someone who has a high IQ is considered smart, but yet still has a very limited capacity of which to bring solutions. Whereas one who has spiritual intelligence can tap into the Holy Spirit and as a result has unlimited resources with access to the mind and power of God. Spiritual intelligence is not just accessing your own spirit or brain. Spiritual intelligence is a connecting with God's Spirit, who is eternal, who has all knowledge and wisdom and knows the future. But you still must choose to access it in every situation. It's like manna. When the children of Israel were crossing the Sinai desert, God not only provided for them a cloud by day and fire by night, but he also provided food for them every day. When they woke up in the morning, manna was there on the ground. All they had to do was gather it up and eat. But the daily proportions of manna were only good for that day. It could not be held over for the next day. By the end of the day, that manna would spoil. God provided fresh manna every day for the children of Israel. There were no reserves left over. Fresh manna only was to be eaten. In the same way, we have access to the thoughts of God and divine wisdom, but we must access it for each and every situation. We do not automatically obtain the thoughts and wisdom of God. We must intentionally access it every time we are in need of it. And the way we access it is simply through conversation with God. Having a conversation with God involves speaking and listening. He talks back, and when he does, we then get used to what that sounds like, and we get used to accessing God's thoughts through conversation. Try it. Ask God a question. Start with something like, God, what do you think of me? And then immediately listen to what is dropped into your thoughts. As we practice this process over and over and over with different questions, we will become familiar with what God's voice sounds like. An example of this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 3. In this passage of Scripture, we read about young Samuel's experience of when he seems to have first heard God's voice. In this story, a boy named Samuel audibly hears his name being called by God himself. But Samuel doesn't recognize God's voice yet. God calls out Samuel's name 3 separate times, and each time young Samuel thinks that it's Eli calling him from another room. After a couple of times of going to Eli saying, "What do you want?" and Eli saying, "I didn't call you," Eli finally realizes that his name is being called by God. Eli then tells Samuel that the next time he hears his name called out, answer back saying, "Yes, Lord, your servant is listening." Young Samuel does just that, and it begins a wonderful life of hearing the voice of God. One of the reasons that Samuel did not know it was God calling him was because Samuel was not used to hearing God's voice. Once he answered, he forever remembered what that voice was like. As we practice over and over speaking to and hearing from God, we will get used to what God's voice sounds like in the thoughts of our mind. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So to make sure that you understand about how we access the thoughts of God, I want to do a short recap. So here's the recap. We can hear the thoughts of God through the Holy Spirit. That is already in us as believers, and not through our human intellect. We hear God through our spirit, and not through our human reasoning. Acquiring more and more theological knowledge does not make it easier to hear God. For some people, too much information can cause a reliance on intellect with less need for experience. Hearing God involves engaging in intentional conversations with God. A conversation involves speaking to and hearing from. For most people, prayer is only about speaking to God and less about listening from God. And so most people listen less and speak more. Maybe it's because they don't know how to listen to God. Learning to listen takes practice. Practicing involves repetition. What we are practicing is listening to God. How do we do that? When asking God a question, listen to what the thoughts are in your mind that follows your question. If you're having difficulty hearing the thoughts in your mind, try relaxing, calming yourself, and being still before you ask. Fix your mind on Him. Do whatever it takes to bring your focus on Him. For more on this subject, watch for our next broadcast, where we will be looking further into the process of renewing the mind. I want to take a moment to thank those of you who support us in prayer and through financial support. It's encouraging to know that through your support, comments, and responses, you believe in what this ministry is doing as we help people break down to a simple understanding what many think is too complex. As always, our contact information is given below. So until next time.